I bought these studio monitors without listening to them first. What possessed me to spend so much money? Am I happy with my decision? Stick around to find out. Today, I discuss my experience with upgrading from a 2.1 system to a 3-way closed cabinet design. For context, I have mixed for years on Yamaha HS50Ms with a HS10W 8-inch subwoofer. In 2012, I was gifted a set of the HS50Ms from an artist that I was working with. Later on, I bought the subwoofer, which was so that I can hear what was happening in the low end. Over time, I started to hate the Yamaha speakers. For years, I struggled to hear enough detail to hear what was going on, which led to me spending more time mixing. Plus, the speaker self-noise from the Yamahas became more pronounced and more obvious when I moved into this room and added enough treatment that it made the environment a lot quieter. I found the book by Mike Sr. called Mixing Secrets for the Small Studio. In the book, Mike argues for closed cabinet speakers, which convinced me to take another look at these sealed designs. Mike recommended Oritone and Yamaha NS10s, as well as some newer closed cabinet designs, both in the book and on his website. My Yamaha monitors feature bass reflex ports on the back, artificially extending the bass and also making them cheaper to manufacture and buy. Consequently, that means that they suffer from a phenomenon called port ringing, which extends the length of the lower frequencies and makes them less than accurate. Resonances can result in time smearing that causes a sharp, impulsive sound like a thud to be reproduced as a prolonged boom. When I performed a sine sweep test, my sub just sounded like a flatulent elephant. So an upgrade was inevitable. On the one hand, I could have continued with the Yamaha speakers because I'd managed to get them pretty flat in my room. Mixers were translating fine, and other engineers were claiming that it's the ear, not the gear, which is true. But what do you do when your ear outgrows the gear? I knew I had to spend some money to really hear a difference. Ideally, I wanted to avoid adding a subwoofer, so the upgrade really needed to be on the larger side. I eventually settled on the Neumann KH310As. It had great reviews. They measured remarkably flat without a sub all the way down to 34 Hz. In that respect, they ticked every box without being overly expensive. They were also considered the gold standard by several people whose opinions I respect. It took me several weeks to save up to just buy one KH310A, and since they're factory matched independently, I just purchased the left speaker first. While this might seem crazy, there was nothing quite like the Neumann in this price bracket at 2,500 Australian dollars per speaker, so I committed to the purchase. When I first set up the Neumann left speaker, I tested it against the right side of my Yamaha system, including the sub. I was a little shocked at first. Listening to a mono 3-way design speaker closed cabinet versus a 2-way with a sub was a very different experience. What I heard, probably for the first time, was the bass connected to the mid and the higher frequencies. When I switched back to the Yamaha system, it felt messy and inaccurate, was disjointed, and it felt vertically stretched out, probably because the sub was set on the floor. Nothing about the Yamaha allowed me to pick out details in the low end like I could on the Neumann. I also noticed that the top end of the Neumann was very clear. By comparison, the Yamaha felt smeared and blurry, like you're looking through a pair of dirty glasses trying to make out an image. This initial assessment gave me the confidence to commit to purchasing the right side monitor, as I was already hearing a major difference even when comparing the Neumann, the mono, with the 2.1 system. It felt tight and accurate, but also fun to listen to. When the right side monitor arrived, I immediately set them on the outside of the Yamaha system to conduct an A/B test between the old and the new. Initially, there was a brief adjustment period. This was the first time that I could hear air around the lows, the mids, and the highs. I started hearing details in reverbs and delays that had not been so obvious to me before. It makes you excited about going back and remixing some of your old mixes. The Neumanns really brought out the nuances in performances. Likewise, if something wasn't right, they let you know straight away. Although I was running room correction on the Yamahas, the Neumanns just sounded better in every single way. For starters, the stereo imaging is beautiful. I listened to many tracks that I'd mixed and many tracks on Spotify, and what I found is that the Yamahas seem to have these dead spots in between the left of center and the right of center. On the Neumann monitors, you hear everything across the pan positions in a much more progressive way. The depth is also significantly better, as I felt like I could hear much deeper into the 3D sound field. Interestingly, heavily compressed tracks also stood out against those that had a lot more dynamics in them. The dynamic mixes felt great by comparison. It was really eye-opening to hear that. It also helped that there wasn't noise in between those dynamics. The self-noise of the KH310s is insignificant. I cannot hear them at all. If anything, my computer is louder. Speaking of louder, when I pushed the speakers quite a lot louder, I noticed a huge difference. The Yamahas started to compress the speaker cones and become more distorted and harsh. On the other hand, the Neumanns just got on with it, and there was no apparent signs of distortion or brittleness. At one point, I managed to hit the onboard limiters. It was when the volume level was far too loud for general mixing anyway. The back panels are well laid out and have plenty of options for EQ and level adjustments. All I'll say is that I had everything at my disposal that I needed. My biggest takeaway from this is that even when you have two speakers that are able to measure relatively flat, the three-way system is vastly superior to listening to a two-way system with a sub. This is especially apparent when upgrading from a ported design to a closed cabinet design. The unported design, like the Oratones or the Yamaha NS10s, really do reveal a lot of detail that is happening underneath. On the new system, I now hear bass guitar and kick separately, meaning I can focus on one at a time quite easily. I can identify which areas of the spectrum instruments occupy without any strain to hear whatsoever. Distorted synths and other instruments too are easier to identify with the fast transient response. The Neumanns accurately ride some of the most complex waveforms where other speakers might really struggle to reproduce the bare essentials of that waveform. I can now hear the quality of the distortion, not just that it exists. The distortion character is just much more apparent on the Neumanns. It might have seemed like a big gamble, but really in the end it was just confirmation of my research. This was money well spent. I'll also say that with these speakers, the addition of a subwoofer is a luxury, not a necessity. They provide plenty of information in the lowest octave, distortion-free with plenty of punch. In a larger room, I would consider adding the KH750s, which is another closed cabinet, and I would place them on stands next to the Neumann KH310As. Neumann, if you're watching, send me two, and I'll happily test them out for you. I hope you enjoyed this review. Consider sharing, liking, subscribing. Until next time, happy mixing.